everyone, and welcome to the DeKalb County CEO Lecture Series. I am Lorraine Cochran-Johnson, and we are prepared to have an absolutely remarkable afternoon. We are going to not delay and get started because this evening we have brought together some of the most dynamic think leaders in Metro Atlanta and in the United States. So, the lecture series this evening, we recognize and celebrate those who have shaped history and continue to influence the future. Today's discussion, Trailblazers and Changemakers, brings together three esteemed leaders whose contributions have impacted civil rights, governance, media, and social change. This event is an opportunity to reflect on the courage it takes to lead, the vision required to create meaningful change, and the legacies that continue to inspire future generations. We are honored to have our distinguished panelists here today, and I look forward to engaging in a thoughtful discussion with them. But before we begin, it is my pleasure to introduce Executive Director Catherine McGregor, who will share a few words about the DeKalb Symphony Orchestra.
Thank you. When Madam CEO Cochran-Johnson invited us to play for this event, we were absolutely thrilled. The DeKalb Symphony Orchestra has been around for 60 years. We were founded in 1964, so celebrating our 60th anniversary season. I can say that everyone on this stage, members of the DeKalb Symphony Orchestra, and I think musicians all over the world agree that music has the power to transform lives, change opinions, unify people from very different backgrounds. So we are very excited to have music added to this wonderful event. We are going to have three pieces tonight. We're going to start the program with George Walker's Lyric for Strings. So this is a piece written for a string orchestra, and it won George Walker a Pulitzer Prize for music, making him the first African-American to win a Pulitzer Prize in music. So we're excited to have this trailblazing piece performed today. And then we're going to be joined on stage with vocalist Denise'Ann Malcom, who will be singing two wonderful pieces, Rise Up and Lift Every Voice and Sing. So thank you all for allowing us to join you this evening. We will be led by our conductor and music director, Dr. Paul Bassine. Please join me in welcoming the DeKalb Symphony Orchestra.
broken down and tired of living life on the merry-go-round, and you can't find the fighter, but I see it in you, so we gon' walk it out. Move mountains, we gon' walk it out. Move mountains, and we'll rise up. We'll rise like the day. We'll rise up. We'll rise unafraid. We'll rise up, and we'll do it 1,000 times again. We'll rise up high like the waves. We'll rise up in spite of the ache. We'll rise up, and we'll do it 1,000 times again. For you, when the silence isn't quiet and it feels like it's getting hard to breathe, and I know you feel like dying, but I promise we'll take the world to its feet. Move mountains, bring it to its feet. Move mountains, and we'll rise up. We'll rise like the day. We'll rise up in spite of the ache. We'll rise up, and we'll do it 1,000 times again. For you, for you, all we need is hope, and for that we have each other, and for that we have each other, and we will rise, we will rise, we will rise, oh, we'll rise up high like the waves. We'll rise up in spite of the ache. We will rise 1,000 times again. So we'll rise up high like the day. We'll rise up in spite of the ache. We'll rise up, and we'll do it 1,000 times again. For you, like the waves, we'll rise up 1,000 times again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to the DeKalb Symphony Orchestra and Denise'Ann Malcom. Let's give her one more hand. Music has always been a powerful force in social change, and today's selections remind us of the resilience and the hope that defines our journey forward. Before we get started, I'd like to recognize some of our esteemed elected officials who are in attendance. Mayor Shamika Reynolds, Mayor Beverly Jones, Councilwoman Nicole Messiah, Commissioner Nicole Messiah, Councilwoman Alicia Washington, Councilwoman Tammy Grimes, Sheriff Melody Maddox, Judge Kimberly Alexander, State Representative Mary Margaret Oliver, Congresswoman Marita Johnson, not Congresswoman, Commissioner, we foreseeing the future here or something? And also a special welcome to our former DeKalb County CEO, Leanne Levinson. And at this time, she will also do special remarks and welcome.
It is just wonderful to be here, but to come in and enjoy the DeKalb County Symphony Orchestra. Wasn't that a wonderful, wonderful rendition for all of us? I think they need to really be commended. I have been a real, let's say, admirer of the symphony over the years, and we don't see enough or hear enough about this wonderful tribute that we're saying today to some people that have made things happen in this county. As I look around and I see so many friends over the years, and one of the things I'd like to say is that nothing happens by itself. It takes a team of people working together to make things happen. And it makes me feel so good to see so many of new faces, and I will say new faces because I've been gone a long time. But what shall I say? I have risen again. Okay. Today, to say to the new people, you're in a wonderful county that has got so much talent, so many good things. And as I say, Marita, and I won't say Congresswoman, I will say Commissioner. But I will say that this county has so much to offer. And for those of you that are here today, you are here to spread the good word. Nothing happens, as I said, by yourself. But today you're going to hear from three wonderful individuals that have contributed so much, not just to DeKalb County, not just to the state, but to the whole nation. And I think what we have to do today, we're living in very challenging, or should I say turbulent times. But it's going to be all of us working together, bringing people together, so that we can come to places like we are today, to hear the people that have made things happen. And you're going to hear from them. But more than that, every one of us, which includes, can I say Melita, my friend? Stand up a minute. I couldn't help but see you. She's now... I knew Melita when she came here from Tifton, Georgia. She was a reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and I was a relatively new county commissioner. But we've kept up with each other. She has wonderful children and grandchildren, And it really makes me feel good when I turn on Sunday morning, the Georgia Gang. She's not a gang, but she is one of the Georgia Gang. Thank you for being here. Today we're going to hear from several people that have made things happen, not just for Leona Levitan, but for every single one of you. And I'm so proud that Lorraine, our new CEO, who in my opinion will be a fabulous individual to make this move. Thank you for making this county move forward. She is a communicator. She is a businesswoman. She understands people. She understands education. She understands what music is. And she is going to bring this county to its height. I am so, so proud of her. Now, I don't know what I was supposed to say. But I did not have a speech, and I don't have a speech writer. So when Leona Levitan says something, it comes from the heart. And excuse me for sitting down, but I'm sitting down because that's what the doctor ordered, okay? Today, we're going to hear from some wonderful, wonderful individuals. And as they come up, and I think they're in the wings somewhere, come up, you're going to hear from the wonderful people that are going to enter. And as they do, I want to say just a few words about each one of them as they come in.
Let me say that Leona Levitan, as many of you know, is the first female to lead DeKalb County. And today she was chosen to give a special welcome because of her relationship with the three individuals who will grace this stage. Today you will hear from our former governor, Roy Barnes. You will also hear from Elder Bernice King, and you'll also hear from Xernona Clayton. Now, they will be taking the stage in just a moment, but before they do, as a matter of good housekeeping, I want to revisit and recognize all of our commissioners that have come this evening, this afternoon. And I'd like to begin with Commissioner Robert Patrick, who represents District 1. I'd also like to acknowledge Commissioner Michelle Long Spears, who serves as our presiding officer. Also in District 3, we have Commissioner Nicole Messiah, who is also the District Commissioner for Porter Sanford. Also, we have Shakira Johnson, who represents District 4. We have Commissioner Marita Davis Johnson, who represents District 5. Commissioner Ted Terry, who represents Super District 6. And also, as the Super District Commissioner for District 7, we have Ladina Bolton. Also, I'd like to acknowledge, if I did not, because often when you're here in the middle of everyone, but I do want to acknowledge that Commissioner Nicole Messiah also serves as our Deputy Presiding Officer. So thank you all for being in attendance here today, and thank you for all of the electeds who have come out, as well as members of the administration that I see present. So at this time, we are now going to go into the formal introductions, and we are going to leave your microphone there with you, Leona, and you feel free to join in, okay?
Okay.
And
now, can I say one thing?
Absolutely.
Okay. You know, I was thinking about with the music, but I thought of one thing, and I've thought of what great things you're doing here in this short while, and I thought of a little line. Those that bring sunshine into the lives of others cannot keep it from themselves. That is you, Lorraine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leona. It's a beautiful thing to have those around you who truly pour into you, who encourage you, and also people who can appreciate the DeKalb Symphony Orchestra and the events that we are bringing forth to the community. So at this time, we will begin with the panelist introductions. And first this evening, we have the legendary Miss Xernona Clayton. Xernona, yes. Xernona is a civil rights activist and broadcast pioneer. Ms. Clayton has been a groundbreaking force in media and civil rights, becoming the first Black woman in the South to host a primetime television talk show. She's also the visionary behind the legendary Trumpet Awards, a prestigious event celebrating African American excellence. Next, we have with us the 80th governor of the state of Georgia, Attorney Roy Barnes. Governor Barnes exemplifies leadership rooted in principle over politics. Most notably, he led the effort to change or remove the Georgia state flag from the Capitol, a symbol of Confederate emblem, a decision that came at great political cost but stood on the right side of history. Thank you so much, Governor Barnes. Also this evening, we have joining us Dr. Bernice A. King. Dr. King is a global thought leader, a peace advocate, and the CEO of the King Center. Dr. King carries forward the legacy of her parents, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. Through her leadership at the King Center, she is a passionate advocate for nonviolence, social justice, and racial reconciliation. Again, thank you to each who have joined us, and let's have the discussion. All right, I guess we'll see if these wonderful microphones are working and I can hear an echo. So I think first mission is accomplished. First and foremost, let me say thank you. Each of you, I have had the pleasure of working with or knowing on a personal level. And today in America, we face interesting times. And each of you, in your own right, are symbolic of history in one form or another. So, I would like to begin with you, Ms. Clayton. As a pioneer in media and one of the first African-American faces to grace television with a long and distinguished career at Turner Broadcasting, tell me how you chose your profession, or did your profession choose you, and what led to the opportunity that honestly has in many ways shaped your life and legacy.
Well, I was really on Channel 5 first before Turner Broadcasting. I was a very good friend to Ralph McGill. I just loved him in history. And so when I moved to Atlanta, the first thing I wanted to do was meet Ralph McGill. He was the editor and publisher of the Atlanta Constitution. And we became very good friends. Well, he would invite me to lunch. We'd do a lot of fun things together. Just absolutely loved that man and adored his smarts. We went to the press club for a meeting, and everybody was glad to see Mr. McGill. And then they said, "Oh, welcome, Mr. McGill." I said, "But Mr. McGill, you know our rule. You've got Xernona Clayton with you." And he said, "Yes, and isn't that exciting?" And the man said, "No, not for us, because, you know, we don't have blacks in our organization." And he said, "Well, she's not just a black in your organization, she's a member." And they said, "How'd she get to be a member?" And he reached in his pocket and pulled out a membership card. He had taken out a membership for me, I didn't even know it. So I became a member without getting approval. So now I'm a member of the Atlanta Press Club, and I was prancing around like I was a big shot, you know, because I made it. But I was invited, well, he was invited to make a speech to some journalists who were from out of the country and out of the city. And they were talking about, you know, the programs of the day. And her father, Bernice's father, Dr. King, was their speaker for the day, and he couldn't make it. He was in Alabama. And then Ralph McGill couldn't make it, and they said, Xernona, will you fill in? And of course I said yes. You know, now that I'm a member, I could act like everybody else, you know. And that was like nothing happened. Well, then that became the news. Now, guess what? Have you heard Xernona Clayton is a member? You know, it's never happened that you had a black for membership. But then in my speech, I mentioned how silly it is, how idiotic it is, that in these times now we keeping black folk out. And I have never really understood the reason. And I said, so there's no rationale for continuing racism. And so I talked about all the stations in the city, called them by name. And I got back to my office after lunch, and Mr. McGill called me, Xernona, what happened? Everybody's looking for you from the management of all these stations. And I said, oh, I thought I made a pretty good speech, you know. Said, no, they want to see you. One of them wanted to run you out of town, you know. And I don't know what the others want to behead me, I think. But I just said to them how silly it was that they're in the news-making business, and why would you leave out a segment of our population when you're going to miss it in your coverage? And it was easier than I thought, because I wasn't trying to, you know, I had a nice job, so I wasn't interested in looking for a job, but I got offers from Channel 2 and Channel 5. And they offered me, and I said, when I listen, I'm kind of snippy, so I like stuff the right way. I want a beautiful set. I want to look like they do on television in the big time. I want a beautiful living room set with real art. I didn't want a picture. I wanted real art on the walls. And I made these high demands. I figured, oh no, we're not going to do that. They gave me everything I asked for. Everything. And wait a minute, then I said, and now I'm from Hollywood, so I want a party. And do you know?
Got the party too?
Yes, Sammy Davis came, and now I knocked the socks off everybody because I knew Sammy Davis personally, because, you know, from Los Angeles. So I just floored everybody, so I was in. I was in. That's how I made it. That's why I came in.
Yes. You're just special. And let me say, if you had never had the opportunity to visit Ms. Clayton's office, to this day, it is full of art. Absolutely beautiful art everywhere you look. And it's just like you, beautiful.
Thank you.
So let's see. Now, you opened up something that I was going to discuss a little bit later, and that was what we see happening across the United States as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, and the need or the movement away from diversity and inclusion. And for this particular question, I'm going to open it to everyone who sits here on the panel. We have seen a lot of changes, honestly, over the past several months. And do you feel that diversity, equity, and inclusion has a place in the workforce and in education and in society? And feel free, just answer at will.
A quick answer, absolutely. That's all my answer is, absolutely.
Am I mic on?
You are, yes.
Okay. And the lights are on.
I would say that oftentimes we get caught up in language, which is not the most important thing. The most important thing is if we have a commitment to what that language means. And so for me, the letters, the acronym might go away, but the work will never go away. Businesses understand, the data shows that businesses that are more diverse and that are inclusive and that they treat their employees well, they do well financially. And there's a generation coming behind that's going to hold them even more accountable to that. So it can't go away. But the language may go away because of what's happening right now. But it's, you know, it's necessary for us to be successful in the world, that we always focus. I mean, the obvious, whether we say it or not, we're a diverse nation. Mm-hmm. You'll never get away from that. Whether we like it or not, people are always going to have different thoughts and perspectives, culturally and otherwise. And so people are going to offer that in any given environment. Now, will we have to fight more, resist certain things more? Of course. Will we have to organize and mobilize and strategize? Of course, to make sure that the impact that should come from diversity, equity, and inclusion. By the way, in our community, we didn't benefit the most from DEI nor affirmative action. A little different in this city. It worked in this city because we had people, again, it wasn't the language, it was because of the relationships through the years that had been established between the religious leaders at first, the faith leaders, the business community, and ultimately, eventually, the civic community and the elected officials that made it work in Atlanta in spite of what was going on in other areas of the South. So that's my perspective on it.
And let me say that, you know, in general conversation, I've heard many people say, as you, even in government, a resolution is only as good as the paper it's written on unless people choose to enforce it or believe in it and support it. And Maynard Jackson was committed to diversity and inclusion. And I've heard more folks say that he created more equity and inclusion for African Americans than any other mayor in history. Now, this is a good segue into the King Center and the work that you do there, because across the globe, it is seen as what I call a beacon for social justice and nonviolent change. And what would you say at this moment are your most pressing initiatives that you are focused on at this time?
You know, it's interesting. Somebody asked my mother at Sanford years ago, I think it was in '96, what did she feel was the most pressing issue of that time? And she took a long time to answer it by basically saying that nonviolence education and training is the most important thing. You know, when people look at the social issues that we're faced with, when you look at what my father called the triple evils of poverty, racism, and militarism, we all know that we have to continue to move toward a world where we coexist together and establish the beloved community. But how do you get there is the question. You know, how do you rally people and keep them focused and energized and grounded, more importantly, from a spiritual and moral plane, because you can't fight injustice with injustice. And so nonviolence education and training has always been our push, but particularly along the civic education and civic engagement route. You know, I'm really engaging in some conversations now with a few organizations about how do we elevate the civic engagement and education more, especially now with everything that's happening on a daily basis that most of us can't keep up with, because it's like rapid fire. Right. It gives you a headache almost. And people need to have something daily or consistently that's past the noise of the media, because while I respect media and it has its place, you know, I've learned that media has no permanent friends and no permanent enemies, but permanent interest. Whereas if you have a neutral platform that can really help people dissect what's going on, give people guidance and direction, and then help them to understand the power of nonviolence and how it brings about that social change, because the most critical form of my father's legacy was that. It wasn't that they, you know, made all these different changes, it's how they did it. And that seems to be what's not understood fully today.
Wow, those are some good points. And today, with so many references to media as being fake news and fake media, you know, it's been interesting to watch, because depending upon what network you watch determines your narrative. And I think it's time that we move beyond narratives. And in so doing, I want to acknowledge Governor Roy Barnes And it's wonderful to see you again. The first time I came and we sat in your office, and you know, I love the pipe. He smokes a pipe like my grandfather, and had such great conversation. I found myself there for about 2.5, 3 hours. And let me say that you, at the time you were elected to the Georgia State Senate, you were the youngest member to ever serve. You are also credited as being one of the top 250 attorneys in the nation. You primarily deal in civil law. And let me ask you, because during our conversation, there's a lot of people here who are electeds. There's some here who may have a desire to be. But you gave me some great advice as an elected official. And you said to me that there would come a time when I would face some very difficult decisions, and that no one may understand why I choose to do what I do. But as long as I do what's in the best interest of people, that after I had done so, to retreat to what you call the riverbanks of righteousness. Do you remember that conversation?
I do. You know, first, it's tough to be in public office. You've only been here a few months, and I guarantee you've already learned that. And one of the things that I think is so important for those that are leaders and in public office is to use a little common sense. Both Xernona and Dr. King have talked about issues about bringing folks in. I read an article recently that tried to explain why we're so polarized. And one of the ideas was that we never come in contact with anybody that has an opposing view.
Yes.
We get on social media and we only talk to those who agree with us. Mm-hmm. We're so busy, we don't know who our next door neighbor is. Nobody's joining the Rotary Club, the Kiwanis Club, the Masons, or the church anymore. And so they're not exposed to those that have different views. And that has created our own bubble, right, where we are isolated and we don't have any contrary views. And that, of course, you know, this fake news business is the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. I mean, you know. But here's the thing. If you're going to be a leader, you can't be afraid to get beat. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, that's just one of the things that happens. You know, I grew up as a typical Southern redneck kid. I thought the South had won the Civil War because that's what everybody talked about, you know, at the store. They talked about, you know. But education, as Dr. King says, is the most important thing. I went to the University of Georgia. I wanted to go to the ag school. My daddy said he wasn't paying me to go down there and farm. If I wanted to farm, I could stay home. So I told him I wanted to go to law school, so I became a history major. And in those years, this was I started in college in '69, so you can figure out this. In the early '70s, if you were a history major, you had to take 15 hours, that is 3/4, of non-European, non-American history. And there was a fellow named Dr. Foley, King there, and he taught African history. First time it had ever been taught at the University of Georgia. And there was only about a half a dozen of us that took African history. And then when I began to study how really European powers just drew lines on a map in Paris instead of by homogeneous populations or similar populations. And then when I started to see really how discriminatory the nation had been over a long period of time, it began to change me. And it took years to change me. I mean, you know, these are not things that happen overnight. And by the time that I was governor, I used to say, we didn't call it DEI. I asked somebody when they're cussing DEI or woke, I said, what does that mean? And they can't define it for you. Mm-hmm. I said, does woke mean that you're courteous to other folks? I said, and that you respect their opinions. I used to say when I was governor that I was going to make sure that my administration looked like the face of Georgia. And so 40% of my appointments were African American and women, and mostly African American. I remember, I know I'm talking too much, so Lorraine, you can cut me off, but
No.
there was a young guy down in Tift County. I don't know if y'all have ever been to Tift County. Tifton. It's on I-75 going south. And he came up to me. He came up to be appointed judge, and he was African American, and I was very impressed with him. And I appointed him judge in that white county. And so I told him, I says, now I'm going to appoint you, but I said, let me tell you something. I said, they're going to be after you in the next election. I love the day I swore him in. His church came to the rotunda, and we had the biggest dinner on the ground you've ever seen in your life. I kept up with that race, and I helped him raise some money and all. And the chairman of the county commissioner's son ran against him, and he beat him. He beat him, and he served until he retired. Listen, it's not affirmative action. It's not DEI. It's given folks that were shut out for centuries an opportunity to be heard. And there are some things that scare me, and there's some things that give me hope. First, the things that scare me is that this movement, listen, Donald Trump is not the cause of this movement. He is a result of this movement. There are a lot of folks out there that just do not want to see people of color succeed. I mean, when they take Jackie Robinson's picture down from the Pentagon, who served in the military, and the Tuskegee Airmen take their picture down, that's just wrong. But it's the result of that movement, and that's wrong, and that scares me. I'll be quite frank with you. But there are some things that are encouraging to me, and that's young folks. Mm-hmm. That's right. Young folks do not see color, not like my generation did, or your generation, or your mm-hmm. generation. I'll give you this little story. I have a granddaughter that is. She's 16, but when she was about 8, across the cul-de-sac from her house, where, Haiti has been, just decimated as a nation. And there were these 2 orphan Haitian girls that were adopted by a white family, and they lived across the street. And Ava, her mother, my daughter was talking to Ava one day, and she said, some children are chosen, and says, your friends are chosen. She said, how do you know? Mm-hmm. She couldn't pick up that the fact that those children were black and the parents were white made any difference whatsoever. That gives me hope right there. I've talked enough. You go ahead.
Well, let me say that, even today across Africa, you still see arbitrary lines that are drawn. And, I think it was Hosea Williams who used to say that he who knows not his history is destined to repeat it. So many of the things that I see today, I wonder where we were.
I wonder where we were too. I mean, you always have backlashes in history. Yes. This is the worst backlash I've ever seen. And I don't understand why. I really do not. Now, I've seen tremendous, I'm 77 years old, I've seen tremendous changes racially in my lifetime. Tremendous. Xernona's seen even more tremendous changes that have existed. But I'm going to tell you what, we're a long way from being a colorblind society. And I blame it on white folks that do not have enough sense to see it and to understand it, but instead resent it. And that's troubling, very troubling for me.
Well, you know, let me say on this stage, we have such a wealth of knowledge. And it reminds me, now it brings me back to you, Mrs. Clayton, because I remember reading an article, and you have broken through many glass ceilings, to say the least. And you talked about once, in the spirit of conversation, and I think that's important in the context of what Governor Barnes has just said, a conversation that you had with a member, I believe it to be the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. And tell us about that conversation, because it is my understanding that after your dialogue, which I think is so important, and I don't know what it is about America that causes us today to not have critical conversations, as if the necessity for the conversation will just go away. But tell us about that conversation and how you were able to change his opinion, because it's my understanding he later denounced his membership in or as a member of the Ku Klux Klan.
Okay, yes. The mayor appointed me to be the liaison between 5 communities over in South Atlanta, because we meaning the city, was participating in a program where they were trying to find out how you make 5 different kinds of communities blend together. And so there was a head of each of those 5 organizations, communities. My job was to meet with all 5 of them to see what they found similarities and what they found differences in those communities. Well, by then I was on television, so people knew who I was, and the first night they had a reception for me to introduce me to the ones who now are going to work with them. And so people would come up because now they're glad to meet me, and I was happy, you know. And they'd come and say, "Oh, welcome, you're going to be working," and give me a handshake, nice handshake, you know, not fingertips, but fingers. And then this guy, who was head of one of the neighborhoods, was last, and I saw him kept moving backwards, so he'd be the last one. So he came up and he put his hands in his pocket so he wouldn't have to shake my hand. But and I, extended my hand, and he didn't respond. I said, "Oh, this must be he," because I didn't know what a Klan looks like. I see him in white uniforms, but I hadn't seen him with clothes on. With clothes. And so now, so now I say, "Uh-oh, think I got him." And sure enough, the next morning, he was the first one at my office to meet now the new head of the program. And he said, "May I sit?" I said, "Oh, of course." He said, "I'm going to ask you some questions." And at that time, I was really working for Martin Luther King, but this was kind of a side experience the city was trying. So he said, "How many Negroes have owned their own homes who live in Detroit?" I thought that was an odd question, but I said, "But I think what you're trying to say is Negroes." It's not, I don't know anybody what you call Negroes, but maybe you mean Negroes, so that's who they are. But I still don't know how many of them own their own homes. Well, how many Negroes own their own homes in Alabama? I said, "I know not that answer either. And so he said, well, let me answer it for you. We have more Negroes in Alabama who own their own homes than the Negroes who live in Michigan. So the point I'm trying to make to you is that all of y'all ran north to free yourselves, and the Negroes are doing better still at home in the South. I said, crazy analysis, crazy analysis. You are a crazy man with some crazy figures. Yeah. Well, the story's long. Let me cut it short for you. I finally taught him how to call what he was trying to call. And every day he came up, but he started wearing a suit every day. He used to wear dungarees and stuff and start dressing up. And I got a call from a man who wanted to take me to lunch. And I said, well, sir, I don't go to lunch with men I don't know. I don't know who you are. And he said, well, I must meet you. I just absolutely must. Because this play, the game playing I was having with Mr. Craig was going on every day, and I didn't know it. But he was telling everybody how he met with me that day, what I said and all that. He said, well, the reason I need to meet you is that I've known Calvin Craig for 26 years. He's never said anything decent about a black person. He said, but he tells me you're a fine young lady, and I want to meet somebody he calls a fine young lady. And I said, well, I think I'm fine young lady too, but I ain't going to lunch with her. I don't know. I don't go with strange men to lunch. But he said Calvin Craig had begun to talk favorably about me, how wonderful I was, how smart I was, how everything I was, and all good. Well, this story is too long. Let me jump to the ending. Every day we talked about issues. Every day. He came by, wore a suit now. He didn't wear dungarees anymore. He wore a suit. And I went shopping, came back, and I lived on a kind of a quiet street, but when I turned the corner, all these cars were in front of my house. And the police were there, the mayor was there. I mean, everybody was there. Now, what in the world? Looked like that's my house, you know. And sure enough, it was. But they told me that Calvin Craig had had a press conference earlier that day and had announced, now after like 22 years, he'd been a Grand Dragon. He had a press conference that day and decided that now he's coming out of the Klan and credited a black woman with changing all of his negative attitudes. And I was that black woman. Yeah. So that was my experience. But his family told me that every night when he came home from work, he talked about what a fine woman I was, and they were shocked themselves to hear, you know. He said, well, isn't she black? I said, yes. He said, but she's a fine, fine woman. And that's the way we went. And sure enough, you know, he subsequently died, and they invited me to the funeral, and his wife said to me, I said, is there something I can do for the family? And she said, yes. I want you to come and have lunch with me. And she and I agreed to do it. Went to her house, scared to death, but I went. And she took me to a white restaurant for lunch to show everybody, you know, here we are together, and said that we were friends from now on. And sure enough, she died recently, and they invited me to her funeral because the mother insisted when she dies, she wanted me there. The children, one of them died, and they said you gotta be. So now I became a member of the family. I didn't eat though. I was scared to eat. I have some sense.
let me say that, you know, as we sit here and talk, this is just great because, you know, having this conversation and having everyone here to be a part of it is absolutely amazing. Now, I was getting concerned when you talked about the question that he had asked, that eventually he was going to ask you how many bubbles were in soap or how many kernels was on an ear of corn, and take away your voting rights. But I do believe, let me say, conversation is what's really important to help change opinion, because there are more things in America that brings us together than separates us. This past Friday, I spoke actually for the Rotary Club. They had a statewide gathering, and I talked to them about the fact that I've never seen an individual who didn't want public safety and safe streets. I've never seen an individual who did not want a good quality of life. And I've never seen an individual who didn't care more about good public education than not. Yeah. But in America, we tend to have the conversations about the things that divide us most, and we never come to the room. And when we do, often we bring with us preconceived ideas and baggage. So, as we talk about conversation and how it can change opinion, I'm coming back to you, Governor Barnes, because I can remember I just moved here when the whole debate on the flag was going on at the Capitol. And I'd like to hear from you personally, because some things take a lot of conviction. How did you come to that conclusion? Because honestly, you knew there would be consequences.
I did, and of course, I'm an eternal optimist. I said, I can explain it to all those white rednecks down there, you know, why we had to move past this. I was sadly mistaken on that account, but, you know, I had a very aggressive agenda: transportation, education. You know, I was trying to build a expressway around Atlanta that would connect into the whole Fall Line Freeway, so we could put all those and go across 75 to 85, so we could put all those trucks off the downtown. That's what backs up the traffic, is the trucks. When you have a wreck, you see there's just trucks for as far as you can see. Had all that stuff going. But I was also negotiating with a German company about locating here. And one day, I had really courted them. All the correspondence that I wrote to them was in German. We had a dinner for them. All the waiters spoke German, and they were very impressed with all that. But the chairman of the board asked me one night, he said, explain this flag you all have. He didn't say you all, but, you know, it's a southern translation of German. Anyway, and I said, oh, it's just a mess. I said, it was put in back during '56 when they were protesting integration from the Supreme Court. No. He said, well, I don't get into to political matters, but he said, we never see that flag except when a bunch of skinheads are walking down the streets of Berlin in some demonstration. And so it's somewhat disturbing. And Pete Corral, who was a great guy, you know, Pete was CEO of Georgian Pacific. And he was a good friend of mine. He's a Georgian. He was, because he's dead now, but he was a Georgian. And he told me, he brought a group of executives to see me, and he said, this flag is becoming an issue at our shareholders meeting. Like South Africa, apartheid became an issue. And I said, listen, Pete, I said, I've got all these things I'm doing. I'll deal with the flag later. Let me fix this. And then Governor Hodges over in South Carolina had invited me to come over and to speak right in the midst of when they were having those controversies over the Confederate flag that was on the state capitol. And I saw some of the demonstration. I spent the night with him in the governor's mansion, and when the trooper was taking me to the airport the next morning, I told the trooper, I said, I heard Governor Hodges up last night in the middle of the night. He told me, Governor Hodges hadn't slept since this flag mess started. And I came to the conclusion that I knew what the right thing was. You know, after you make up your mind that you got to do something, it's pretty easy to pick up what the right thing is to do. And I knew that, this is nothing, it's a racial symbol. I mean, let's just face it. I mean, it is a racial symbol that was waved when they were integrating Little Rock in Central High School. It was waved against your daddy everywhere they were. It was a racial supremacist, white supremacist symbol. And I said, we're going to take it off. And the night before, I introduced the bill, or had a substitute. I'd had a dummy bill introduced, sent to rules so that I could have something to amend. I had all the CEOs to the governor's mansion, and I said, tomorrow we're going to change the flag. And they were shocked, including Pete Corral. And I said, we're going to change it tomorrow. And so I went upstairs. Mary, my wife, many of you know her. We've been married 55 years. And we were just kids when we got married. There is something to be said for marrying young, I want to tell you. I mean, I went upstairs, and Mary was already in bed. She was sitting up reading and watching television. And I told her to slide over, and I sat down on the side of the bed, and I said, I'm going to change the flag tomorrow. She knew about it. And I said, and I'm going to get beat in 2 years. And this is the reason we've been married 55 years. She said, I'm ready to go home tonight. And I said, I might can pull it off, but it was tough. And it was a great political issue. I mean, for the other side. I mean, they had flaggers that followed me around everywhere I went, with Confederate flags screaming at me. My troopers used to just hate it because I would make them, when I have the demonstrations on the side of the road, I said, stop and let me go talk to him. And they'd say, oh, Governor, don't do this. Please, please, please do not do this. And I said, no, they got a right to fuss at me. They're wrong, but they've got a right to fuss at me. So I'd go out there, and of course they'd spit and scream. And I said, just calm down, just calm down. I said, let's talk. I remember one night in Waycross, there was a big group of them, and they surrounded us. And what the security does when you like that one trooper gets your left hand, he puts his arm out like that and says, no closer to this than this. Mm-hmm. And then the other one, another trooper will put his back to your back so they can't hit you in the back. And it was, rough and everything. My daughter got married the last year I was in the governor's mansion. She got married at the mansion. They protested my daughter's wedding, But it was worth it to move on past it. And that's the reason I tell leaders, I told you, if you're afraid to use the power that you have to do the right thing, you don't need to be doing it at all. One last thing I want to say. I am not a saint. The change that I had was a gradual one. Your mother helped me change. You probably don't even know this story. When we had the vote, now remember, I'm from DeKalb County, and it was 97% white at the time. When we had the vote on Martin Luther King's birthday, I voted every which way there was. I voted yes, no, and then I walked on one vote. Within 6 months, I went to see your mother, and I said, I want to apologize to you personally. And I said I was a coward. And she had the kindest words for me. She said, don't worry about it. We know where your heart is. And I told her, I promised her, I said this. I said, I'll never let that happen again. And she said, I know you won't. Now, you know, we need to go, all of us, particularly, I wish this room was filled with the biggest white rednecks we could put in here. As many Trumpers as we could put into this room, I wish they were here. Yeah. Because I want them to hear this. Listen, you cannot be a Christian, I'll just start off with this, and hate your fellow man just because they're different color. And I remember when I was a kid growing up, churches having police officers so that if an African American came to the church, they would turn him away. There's one great story, and then I'm going to hush. I promise I'm going to hush. There's one great story, and it's about Clarence Jordan, or as they call it, Jordan. And he created Cornucopia, which is down in Sumter County. And this was in the 1940s. He had a PhD in Old Testament Greek. And he created an integrated farm down there where they all lived together, black and white. And, of course, they were firebombed by the Klan. They sold pecans, you know, and it'd say, buy your nuts from Georgia. I mean, that was the way they were supported from it. They tell this story about him. There was a fellow from India that was dark complected, as many of the Asians do. Asian folks are. And he took him to this little Baptist church where Clarence went. And the chairman of the board of deacons met him in the yard and says, you know, you can't bring him in there. He says, and Clarence had the Bible in his hand. He said, show me in the book where I came. And this chairman of the board of deacons said, now, preacher, don't start that Jesus stuff with me. And so faith and conversation, but what worries me is that bubble I talked about. Mm-hmm. We create this bubble. We don't have these type of exchanges. You don't hear from folks like me. Or you don't hear from folks like the Grand Dragon that Xernona talked about, mm-hmm. that you can't admit you're wrong. My changes were gradual and came to a head, but they don't want, those that really are in power don't want to hear a different view and how it's wrong. They have their own set of facts. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no. No. I won't allow you to apologize, and I must say that I didn't know that you changed, Roy. I thought when I met you that you'd always, but let me say that, most of us in this room at some point we've gone through some form of revelation. But it's not a difficult thing to do what's right.
No, but Dr. King is right. Education is the most important thing to that. And it's the education of how change has come about by nonviolent, passionate means. And that means you vote, number one.
Yes.
And you bring changes back.
And this is a perfect segue over to you, Dr. King, because as the CEO of the King Center, I see you in many ways as the keeper of the dream of your parents, both Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as well as your mother, Coretta Scott King. And a while back, you launched the beloved Community Talks. And I wanted you to share why you felt it was important to launch those conversations.
Well, it was at the inception of all of the beginnings of the racial divide. Mm-hmm. And our tagline was bridging the racial divides, in fact. And I just thought it was important because my philosophy is what he's been saying, what Ms. Clayton lived through, what she did. It's so important to the climate now. So many people are afraid of crossing those lines. So many people dismiss people who don't think like them. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a grave error. And I think people misunderstood my father because he was so broad in his thinking. He had a worldview. He saw us as a part of a world house. And he also saw the dignity of every human being, even those that were his enemies. And so for me, it was about how do we begin to bring diverse perspectives on a stage and teach people how to have the conversations. Learning how to listen first, seeking to understand before you're understood. Mm-hmm. Which is hard. It's a discipline. But there has to be a willingness to do it. So when we started it, we actually had former members, should I say, of the Klan, the skinheads. There was a gentleman, in fact, there was a Grand Dragon in Mississippi that we invited in. He had been a part of a group of people who, Daryl Davis, happy birthday. Friday, that's when mine is. And so Daryl Davis, some of you may have heard of him, lives in Maryland. And he spent some time with many Klans members there because his question was, how do you hate me when you don't know me? And his engagement with them caused many of them to leave the Klan and to turn over their uniform to him. And so he brought one of those. I ain't mad at you. He brought one of those gentlemen to our beloved Community Talks. And it was so powerful for me because that gentleman had to apologize to me for the way that he saw my father and some of the things he had said and done related to my father. And to think right now I have his number in my phone. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a different world in some regards, and yet we're still faced with some very similar things that my parents faced. But I thought that was important. I still think that's important. I applaud Senator Sanders for what he's been doing. I think we need to do more of that. I've been saying that to so many people around us. I said, we need to create conversations in these rural communities. We keep talking about Trump, 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 Trump. I said, no, we need to come together as people. We need to go into those communities. We need to hear them. They're part of our human family. And we may discover that we have a lot in common, and the very thing that's trying to divide us, maybe we can help to overcome that divide just by showing up. That's one thing Trump did. He showed up in their communities. And so, you know, I applaud what Senator Sanders, as I said, is doing again, and I hope that more people will do that, because in order to change what's happening now, you know, it is going to take those kind of efforts. We're going to have a strategy to change Congress. We can't do the same, you know, rodeo. You know, we can't, you know, go to the choir, right, so to speak. Yes, you maintain what you have, but you got to be able to reach these other voters, and many of them are primed now, because what's happening is not just affecting one group of people, it's affecting all Americans except for the, you know, wealthy elite. And so those talks are important. We have to continue that in this climate. More and more, I know more people are beginning to pick up on that and beginning to do that and working in that area. And yesterday I had an opportunity again to go to the Legacy Museum, from enslavement to mass incarceration in Montgomery, and the lynching memorial there, Peace and Justice. And I encourage everyone who has not been there to go there. You know, I'm always encouraging people to go to that museum. To me, it's the most, not one of, it is the most important museums in our nation, because it's the only one that tells the story and ties it together about how white supremacy even embedded itself in our systems and structures.
And honestly, too, I think today, within the African American race itself, there are still remnants of the racial divide that exist even amongst us, that sometimes we fail to acknowledge. And if you have not gone to the museum, it's very powerful.
It's very powerful. But one of the things that I keep zoning in on is when he said that, and I'm paraphrasing now, that we have made progress or won, you know, the war in terms of racial justice from a legal standpoint, which is questionable now. But he said what survived what Dr. King and them were doing was the narrative. So in order for us to change this racial narrative of white supremacy, then we have to do what Governor Barnes is talking about. We have to do what she dared to do, more and more. And more of not just the leaders, you know, but all of us have to begin to do that every day of our life. So my challenge to everybody here is get out of the bubble.
Yes.
You know, you have an opportunity. You encounter people quite often, and you say, I don't want to deal with them. You know, they're one of them. You know, no, they're one of us. You know, they just happen to grow up in a way, perhaps, you know, unfortunately, where they were miseducated, they were exposed. One of the things I learned from one of the skinheads, that former, should I say, that was a part of our Beloved Community Talks, is that the reason he joined is because he had such a dysfunctional family. He was looking for a family. And when I thought about it, I said, his narrative, in a different way, is no different than the narrative of our children who end up in gangs.
Yes.
You know? And so when we understand these things, we can open up our minds and hearts a little bit and begin to connect with their humanity, because there's humanity in there somewhere. You may have to work for it, but you got to give up your right to be right in the process, and not always be, you know,
Right. And let me say, I want to reiterate, because I heard you very clearly, the charge is for us all to engage in the conversation. Because oftentimes people tend to feel that it's the responsibility of an elected official or of the clergy or of a particular group. But one of the things that I love is the entire premise behind the beloved community, and also the call for civil obedience, because those letters that Dr. King wrote from the Birmingham jail, if you've never taken the time to read them, they are truly what I consider to be they were first and foremost forward thinking. And they were the greatest call for civil obedience that I have ever read. And that also brings me to realizing the state of America today. And this question goes right back to you. And understanding your father's dream. Would you say today that we have a dream deferred or a dream that has been materialized?
So for me, you see how the chairs turn?
What's that?
I don't have a profound answer. You know, it depends on what angle you're looking at it from. For me, deferred means it's put off. Mm-hmm. And I would dare to say that it's not put off. I think there are people in every generation that are working toward the realization of the dream. And as with any vision, because that was a vision he articulated for not just this nation, but really the world, there's going to be opposition, there are going to be threats, there are going to be weaknesses in the process, and we're in a season of great opposition and threats.
Yes.
And weaknesses. You know, and when I speak of weaknesses, I'm speaking specifically of the fact that we're in a time where now more than ever we need an unparalleled unity, a unity around plan and strategy. There are people meeting in silos all across this nation. And when I say silos, I don't mean they haven't crossed over and created, you know, collaborations with different groups. But at some point, all of this has to connect for the greater good because the force that we're fighting is so great now. You know, it reminds me of Nehemiah, and I know it's a Sunday, but Nehemiah 4 and 19, where, you know, he's meeting with the whole assembly of people and all the leaders, and he said, you know, look, the work is extensive. Mm-hmm. And we're widely separated on the walls. That means people are working in their various ways on rebuilding the walls, you know, on impacting community and working on the issues in various communities. He said, but when you hear, and you can't make this stuff up, he said, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, and I just took off the ET and said, when you hear the sound of the trump, rally together.
Yes.
And our God will fight for us. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying this is this season now, like they did in the movement. It wasn't everybody per se, but what we saw was a joining together that allowed the power of God to exhibit itself in that movement. And now that's needed more than ever. And that's one of the weaknesses we have. We haven't figured out how to really unify in a way that we can connect, collaborate, and coordinate, because there are many efforts going on, but when you're a strategic thinker, you have to figure out, okay, what goes first, what goes next, who is appropriate for this versus that. That was the greatness of my father's leadership. He knew who was amongst him. He knew all of the leaders. And I need to emphasize that because this generation always says, well, we don't want just the leader. I said, well, you're insulting Andrew Young, James Orange. You're insulting Hosea Williams, C.T. Vivian, Coretta Scott King. You're insulting Dorothy Houghton. You're insulting Amelia Boynton. They were all leaders, working with leaders. My daddy just happened to be the spokesperson, you know. And so he understood, though, when it was time to send a Hosea versus an Andy. Andy was a negotiator. Hosea was an agitator.
I have to.
He knew when it was time to agitate versus no. We need, or how to mix and blend all that at a certain time. Is it right to go here now? You know, and then strategy. You know, when he went to see Johnson about the Voting Rights Act, and there was some pushback because civil rights had just been passed. It's like, I don't have it's going to be hard to get the support now, blah, blah, blah. And Daddy had to figure out the strategy. We're going to give him some power.
Right.
That's right.
So we can't just go in the normal vein of what's happening. Typically now nonviolence is equated with protest, demonstrations. It's never equated with strategy. It's never equated with discipline. It's never equated with what we try to educate and train people on, which is the 6 principles and steps of nonviolence. The fifth step of what everybody's been doing is the fifth step of nonviolence, which is direct action. There are 4 steps that precede that, one of which is extremely important, all of them important. And let me say that. All of them are probably equally important. But there's one in particular, which is personal commitment. They called it back then purification. Because if you are not properly grounded, if you don't look at your own motives in this, you can become what you're trying to fight. Bitterness can become your driver instead of love, which nonviolence was steeped in. You know, that's why we define it as a love-centered way of thinking, speaking, acting, and engaging that leads to personal, cultural, and societal transformation. And so we're living in a time where it's easy to become very, not only angry, but become very bitter about what's happening. Right. And we have to guard against that. And so what it helps us, nonviolence is a powerful way of channeling some of that anger. Not bitterness is whole different than anger. Anger is a good thing. Even God said, be angry. But he said, sin not in the anger. When you get into the bitterness, you start going in a way that you get closer to the hate. And hate becomes like a separation, and God doesn't exist in hate. He exists in love. He is love. And so for me, the power is, you know, in this nonviolence. And when you think about that dream, the threats that we are faced with, nonviolence is going to ground us in those oppositions and those threats, so that when we fight it, we're fighting it out of the right spirit, out of the right heart, out of the right attitude, and with the right strategy. So the dream's not deferred. People have been working on it. It's just now we got to figure out, how do we continue to move things forward grounded in Kingian nonviolence.
Well, let me say that sitting here this afternoon, I've heard the words education, conversation, and strategy that truly become, for me, the major takeaways from the conversation. Because I venture to say, you know, I grew up down in Lower Alabama, saw my granddaddy, you know, a farmer. I watched good people, and they knew how to organize. And I want to say that, you know, the charge to everyone here is to go out and be the change that we seek, that we know is necessary. Because when I look at Dr. King, your mother, Ms. Coretta Scott King, when I look at you, Governor Barnes, you stood for something. And I think that in so many instances, what I see right now in America, we were either comfortable or we failed to understand, even when we were told, the consequences of our actions and being complacent. And now, you know, we find ourselves here, and, you know, I often think of CTV and Dr. King and so many other great leaders. And what I'm charging us to do is be that next generation. Because my grandfather and many of the people that we talked about here today were very rare people. And they understood the necessity to come together, to work together for a greater cause. Because that old saying, it don't matter what ship you came in, we all in the same boat now, okay? So let us not forget that. And this afternoon, as we prepare to go out, I think we're right on target here, I'd like to give each one of you, starting with you, Ms. Clayton, the opportunity to share your parting words with the audience that has come out today.
As I listened to Bernice, I thought of something that I have not told her. One of the last things that Dr. King said to me was, he said, you know, I've been thinking, and I know you're going to live forever. Well, I thought that was a nice compliment, that I'm going to live forever. But he said, you know, before I die, I wish we could learn how to live together as blacks and whites. And he said, it's real simple. All we have to do is go back to the Bible. And it talks about birth. And what happens is the stork somewhere up above brings down a stork, leaves it on the front porch. Somebody comes out and claims the little one, brings him in. He becomes a member of the household. And then you look around next door, the same thing happens. That's how babies come, they just come. And if you needed a cup of sugar, you just reach out the window, borrow a cup of sugar from your neighbor, and that's fine. A relationship with your neighbor, because you already become friends. Babysits when time comes, and we used to do the things that people did as neighbors. And said, maybe we ought to figure out ways to just have everybody live together so that we can have that neighborly spirit again, and borrow the sugar, babysit the baby, be kind to your neighbor, and then friendships form. I'm not ever sure that that kind of thing takes place, but it sure is a good hope that we wish we could, living together, sharing together, feeling simpatico together. How much better our life and our world would be. That's a wish. And maybe that will remain just what it is, just a wish. But sometimes dreams come true. And I'm hoping that one day mine will come true. We will all learn to live together as blacks and whites, rich and poor, and borrow the sugar next door if we need it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Governor Barnes?
Well, I think Xernona and Dr. King have summarized pretty well what we need to do. First place, we need a great awakening. We need a new revival in this country. I am alarmed about how many now claim they have no religion, or no faith. And I can see it. I mean, a lot of young folks are frustrated by what they can, because they see that, quote, Christian evangelicals marching with Trump really in some sort of hate-filled message. Mm-hmm. I consider myself a Christian evangelical, but not for a political candidate. It is for that beloved community that you talk about and borrowing the sugar from the next door. I am concerned about where we are. I'm generally an optimist. I'm always an optimist, you know. Just like I told Mary on that night, you know, maybe I can make it through. But we're resilient people, but listen, we have to understand right now there are forces, and they are in power, that seek to divide us as a people. I watched stand at the General Assembly. I don't think former governors need to go to the Capitol. We've had our time on the stage. The only time I go to the Capitol is when we bury a dead governor, and I just hope I'm not the next one. But I do read and keep up what they do down there. One of the things that really bothered me was 2 or 3 years ago, they passed this bill called Divisive Concepts, that the schools should not teach divisive concepts. Now, I don't see how you teach history without teaching divisive concepts. Now, I mean, does that mean that we can't teach that slavery was the original sin of this nation, or that segregation and lynching were wrong? But I wonder how many school children, seniors in high school, know who W.B. Du Bois was. Or the soul of black folks. I think it ought to be required reading for every student in school before they graduate. Or know who James Weldon Johnson, who's, lift every voice and sing. I heard backstage all of that. About who Martin Luther King was. And about the struggles that he had. And all of these things are being repressed by those that seek divide us. And when we do not know who our next door neighbor is, and we do not know who is in our community, and we are kept from learning about the struggles that have brought us where we are today, that is very dangerous. And only we can change it. Only by your vote, your involvement, and by being active in the community, an activist in the community, can we change that situation. And it needs to be changed. Thank you.
Thank you. And let me say your comments are so well placed at this moment, because it begins with divisive concepts, it becomes critical race theory. Even classics like Moby Dick are now not taught. And for people like me, it was a rite of passage to have read and have conversation now about books like The Scarlet Letter. And, one of the concerns that I have is with the new generation, or the generation of young people that are now being educated, there is a gap in education. And that said,
one of the books that they don't call it banning, they said not appropriate, not age appropriate. One of the books was a biography of Frederick Douglass. I mean,
great book. Autobiography, yes.
And I mean, who could, because it was a divisive concept, and all of that stuff. I mean, but I want to know how many seniors could identify who Frederick Douglass was and his importance, but I'm going to hush.
But no, but what you see is that we have a hard time acknowledging truth.
Yes, we do.
We want to acknowledge what is convenient, and we don't want to have difficult conversations, of which we've all said are so important. And in closing, Dr. Bernice King.
I thought I was... Why she want to ask me a different question?
I am. I realized I have notes. And my question
I got some on my mind. Okay.
Would be, as we move forward in today's world, what is your call of action for those who wish to continue the work of social justice and nonviolence?
Okay, I can still answer the way I was going to answer it.
Okay.
Because I want to flow with what they were saying as well.
And I want you to, this is your moment.
I think it's important that we all become learners and teachers. When Ms. Clayton mentioned about learning to live together, in my father's book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos and Community, in the World House chapter, and I encourage you to pick that book up. And of course, I'm going to point you to pick it up from thekingcenter.org, or you can get it at the King Center bookstore. But he talked about the challenge before us is learning how to live together as brothers. Of course, he meant universally, or being forced to perish together as fools. And so earlier, as we have been talking, I think it's important to re-emphasize the learning to live together. And so every day that you get up, ask yourself or challenge yourself to think about this day, I want to focus on learning how to live together with my brother and or sister in this world? Is what I'm doing aligning with that? That's a question we need to ask every day. Am I learning? But also commit to being a teacher, because what they just said about what's happening, obviously, or has happened and continuing to happen with our school system, we have to become the teachers. I mean, I didn't get most of my Black history in school anyway. No. And so we can't forfeit our responsibility to do what the schools aren't doing while we're challenging that. Because in the meantime, while people are resisting, things are going unmet. Mm-hmm. And so we got to step in those gaps during that time. So that which you know and have learned historically, and each one of us have circles of influence. Use it, become a teacher, dispenser of knowledge and education. Share those books and those readings or whatever with the next generation. The next thing is, don't participate in cancel culture. Participate in cultivating relationships. I want to say that. Don't participate in cancel culture. Participate in cultivating relationships. So no cancellation, but cultivation, because it's easy to do that. And you don't know who you're dismissing, who you are discounting. Here was an example just now. Remember, Ms. Clayton said, I didn't know that. Lorraine said, I didn't know that. So please, just don't dismiss, because if people dismissed him, if my mother, anybody. So that's very important. And the final thing, which is a little tougher for everybody, for all of us in here. My father, mother, and all of those that work with them had to risk the loss of something.
Yes.
For us to even sit here today, to be in this conversation on the stage, this would be a little bit dangerous back in their time. A lot dangerous. Please really sit back and think about what price or sacrifice are you willing to make in this season? Because we're in that season now. If it ain't hit you directly yet, it's coming. And we cannot compromise on justice. We can't compromise on truth. So whatever you have to do to prepare yourself, to think about it, please. Because if we don't make those sacrifices, then the evil that's happening now is going to triumph. We as the people have to be willing to put some stuff on the line. Mm-hmm. They had jobs, families, people had to leave school during that season. Now, I'm not just saying go and leave school, but I'm saying ask yourself the question, because that's the kind of revolution that we are involved in right now. It's going to require sacrifice. It's going to require paying a price. And if they did it for us, we ought to be willing to do it for another generation.
And let me say that it has, again, been an honor. I couldn't be more grateful to all of you for coming here today to share your time and also to share your wisdom, because this matters. These conversations are important. And it's unfortunate that we don't have more serious conversations with individuals who are living history. So for us, on behalf of the entire Board of Commissioners for DeKalb County, for the more than 763,000 people, I want to say thank you. And I'd like to announce to you, Governor Barnes, that when you said retreat to the riverbanks of righteousness within 72 hours, I was there of taking office. And now I will go back to the script. So let me say we've had the privilege of hearing from three remarkable individuals who have shaped history through leadership, vision, and also through their actions. Ms. Clayton, Governor Barnes, and Dr. King, your insights remind us that history is not just something we study. It is something that we create. As we move forward, may we in this room take inspiration from the stories and the conversation that has been shared here today. May we have the courage to challenge injustice, the wisdom to lead with integrity, and the resolve to build a future that honors the legacy of those who have come before us and to whom much is owed. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening for such an amazing conversation. Thank you.